Welcome back to the Daily Nugget, Daily Property Insights. One topic, 20 minutes or less. Myself, Lotze, and joined by Maharjan, a former Auckland town planner. And Raj, the question to you today, and this is quite an interesting one out there at the moment, is cross lease and converting it to a freehold. So to see what your thoughts around it, what's the possibilities, how does it work to go from a cross lease and look to make it a freehold property?
Thank you, Lawrence, very much for having me again. This is a very interesting scenario in Auckland.
Mm-hmm.
And the best estimate is there are about 90,000 properties across Auckland with sitting on cross lease. This was an arrangement done long time ago for considering the situation there. Now, your question, how do you convert cross lease to freehold? Totally doable. Totally doable. This is, let us look at it this way. Cross lease means you and I have a property right next to each other. Mm-hmm. We have a joint ownership. We have a joint ownership on the title. Converting it into freehold means we are separating the title now. The end result we are wanting is Lawrence has one freehold title. He can do whatever he wants to do. And Raj has one freehold title. And I am totally entitled to do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. I no longer have to ask Lawrence every time I do anything, even do something on my fence in a cross lease situation. So in cross lease, you are tied together. Anything you do, you have to get written permission from your neighbor. Might be about driveway, might be about any other development, or might be as simple as I mentioned, about the fence.
Yep. So obviously, that's what the cross lease is. So what's the steps to go in to actually apply from a cross lease to a freehold?
Okay. Now this is from a town planning and resource consent point of view. Mm-hmm. It is a very similar or exactly same as a standard subdivision. Let us take a simple example of two properties next to each other. From a subdivision point of view, it is exactly as converting one section into two sections. Mm-hmm. However, the resource consent, it requires a resource consent, of course. The resource consent is a control activity resource consent. Yep. Whereas, as we discussed before in other episodes, for your residential development and then converting it into two freehold, that's a restricted discretionary application or resource consent. This one, cross lease to freehold, is a control activity resource consent. It's more or less straightforward, but again, no resource consent can be guaranteed or straightforward. There's always curly balls, might be surprises, but in my experience, it is fairly straightforward. The only thing there that might hold you back is actually not planning matter. Planning matters are very straightforward. Your relationship with your neighbor. Mm-hmm. Now, that is a civil matter. So if you have been very good and been loving thy neighbor, you should be able to cruise this one through.
But the one point I want to think about, right? So, like you said, the application is very similar to subdivision, taking one and cutting it up to two, right? Mm. But my expectations or my assumptions is you can only apply for it. You can always apply, council can go yes or no. But I'm assuming to apply and hoping to be successful, your two that you get has to still meet the minimum requirements for that zoning area and the land use in that area, I'm guessing, right? So you can't take let's say for a real weird example, you can't take a 400 square meter section that's a cross lease and then cut it up into 200 square meter sections if that local area requires minimum of 300 square meter sections, right? So I'm guessing you still got to meet some minimum standards to be able to cut it from 2 to 1. Is that correct?
That is correct. There could be a vast array of scenarios here, Lawrence, as we can clearly see what you just outlined. Let us stick to that example. That is why in the beginning I said it is as if you're any other standard application, subdivision application process. We've got a scenario. in a cross-lease situation, 2 owners with one house on each land.
Yep.
Now, while preparing an application, what I would have to do as a planner is, when writing the application, I would have to assess each individual piece of land and house with the unitary plan. Where is it? Bulk and location, yards, driveway, everything. I would have to assess it against the unitary plan. But however, the house already exists there, right?
Yep.
So you have got some existing rights, existing use rights that you can apply. That's why I said it's a fairly straightforward control activity. That doesn't mean it is like permitted as if in the 3x3 development. Even 3x3 could be how complex. We saw that. So that is the scenario. The way I see it is like, say, I don't know if it is appropriate or not. You're in a relationship situation together, and what you're trying to do is decouple and be separate on your own.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Makes perfect sense.
How complex that could get, your property wise, other arrangement, etc., etc.
Yep. Now, I thought I'll just put it in there because a lot of people will look at it. I know a few years ago when I've been in the property investment game for over 10 years. I know that it is part of a strategy. A lot of developers look like mom and pop developers is buying both cross leases or buying all the property that exists within the cross lease. So you don't have to ask your neighbor. You just have to ask yourself pretty much, and then applying to take it to freehold, right? Yeah. But the big thing to think about with this is, what I mentioned is, you still got to meet the minimum requirements or close enough to the minimum requirements so that when you apply for it, that you're going to get the approval. So you can't go and say, cool, I want to take a cross lease and I want to cut it up into 2, and buy the 2 standalone properties no longer meet the requirements that the unitary plan requires. And that's sort of where the council will turn around and go, no, you can't do it. Even though the application was done correctly, you still don't meet our standards.
Now, that's a very interesting scenario you mentioned. Say I am the owner of both cross-lease properties next to each other. Now, I can give written approval to myself. That is totally doable. That happens all the time. However, the consent process involves more than your written permission from the neighbor, including assessing that application, looking at effects of the existing house on the site. And when you separate it, now what happens to the drainage? Where is it? Right? Because you are going on your own. Now, if the drainage is laid out in such a way, you might have to actually completely provide separate connections or separate driveways. You see how it could impact. So you are one at the moment, you're going on your own, and you have to, as we say, as the town planners say, a land has to be accessible, serviceable, and developable. That has to be ensured when you are converting the cross lease, or this applies also in the situation when you are going from cross lease to freehold.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Raj. As always, so much great insights to that. And thanks to everyone else that's listening or watching at the moment for coming over to the Daily Nugget. Daily Property Insights, one topic, 20 minutes or less. And as always, hope to see you tomorrow.